Welcome to the Emerald City Hockey Podcast. Join RJ and Dylan as they discuss each week's Seattle Kraken news and top stories from around the league.
When I was about 10 years old, my brother and I were playing hockey out in our driveway. And I was skating with the puck, and my brother did something he doesn't normally do. So as I tried to make a move, he closed in on me and hit me with a big hip check, knocked me right onto the ground. Thankfully, I didn't land funny or anything, so I was okay. I was shaken, but I wasn't hurt. Now, I could have dropped the gloves and gone after him right then, but I thought, no. He needs to know what this is like, and he needs to know he can't do this again. So I got up, and I waited. And the next time he skated in with the puck, I went at him, full head of steam. But he saw me coming, and he got out of the way. So I missed him. Now, not only did I miss him, but I went barreling into the planter next to the driveway. So I learned a lesson about revenge that day. Which brings me to the Carolina Hurricanes. Are Tom Dundon, Don Waddell, and company about to go barreling into the planter here?
Yes, I mean, you're of course referring to the Kotkaniemi offer sheet that they signed him to as revenge for when Montreal a few years ago signed Sebastian Aho to an offer sheet. You and I have talked many times when it comes to restricted free agents. These offer sheets are kind of considered, something you just don't do. There's that gentleman's agreement amongst all GMs that we won't do that to each other. Why would we want to give these young players money that we have to then deal with against our cap? If we all kind of agree not to do this for each other, we can kind of keep all the salaries low. But it's definitely not collusion. Yes, I would say Carolina is barreling for the planter because, I mean, there's two arguments to be made, but for me, I don't see a winning scenario for Carolina in this. I know people will say just the fact that they've put Montreal in this position where if they were to match I believe it's $6.1 million offer sheet for Kotkaniemi, that Montreal would be over the cap, and so then they're going to have to lose a player just to fit him under the cap and keep him. But so just by putting Montreal in this situation that Carolina was in a couple of years ago, they've won, right? But to me, they've lost. It's actually a no-win scenario for Carolina, because you're either overpaying for Kotkaniemi at $6.1 million for a guy who's at best a second-line center, and you're having to lose a first and a third to Montreal if they don't match, or you've screwed up Montreal for 1 year in a year when they probably weren't even going to be a playoff team, because it's only a 1-year offer sheet. It's not like they're going to lock up, they're going to force Montreal to lock into Kotkaniemi for 7 more years at this inflated price. It's literally 1 year. I can't imagine a world in which Kotkaniemi signs for this much money next year, right? It just comes across as petty, and I feel like you can't win a scenario when you're just being petty. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's if there was any question about the intent or the pettiness of it, the $20 signing bonus. I mean, that puts that to rest. I mean, this is exactly why they did it. And I read a good point the other day that I don't think this is Don Waddell's doing necessarily, the general manager. This has the owner, Tom Dundon, written all over it. And a lot of people claim that Sebastian Aho sheet a couple years ago was actually a favor to the Hurricanes because he came in at probably under market value. They got the deal done for him at a reasonable AAV. But of course, it was the structuring of the contract being so front loaded with all that money right away. And looking at what Tom Dundon has done since, especially this year with Nedeljkovic and Dougie Hamilton leaving, and his hesitance to pay guys, especially early on, that probably did frustrate him quite a bit. And I think we're seeing the evidence of that right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And you bring up Nedeljkovic, Hamilton. It's also the coaching staff, right? I mean, like, the coaching staff is one of the most underpaid, certainly for what they've brought to the table for the last couple of years. Part of that is Rod Brindamore. He doesn't exactly ask for a lot of money because he obviously made plenty during his playing career. But we've heard frustrations from coaches and scouting staff members that have they're now previous Carolina Hurricanes employees that the team does not want to pay those people very much. Certainly not compared to what other teams are willing to pay for them. So yes, that's again why it comes off as just extremely petty, because it's like you're not willing to pay like all these people who have done good work for you, whether it's on the ice or off the ice, but you're willing to go out there and create this 1 year, $6.1 million Jesperi Kotkaniemi offer sheet for like no reason. Like, just to get back at Montreal. Like, okay.
Now, I know what we think of this offer sheet. We think it's not a good idea, but I have to try and give Dundon a fair shake here, and let's play devil's advocate for a second. Is this worth it to show that I guess you won't be messed with, that you shouldn't do this again because he's going to come after one of your players? I mean, what do you think? For that reason alone.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it gives another team, a little bit of pause if they were to do it. Obviously, Carolina just locked up Svechnikov, so they don't really have anybody left that I would see as being super worth, submitting an offer sheet to try to steal one of them. I guess, but again, I don't know. I mean, teams are so gun shy about doing it to begin with that I don't know that this actually really adds that much more to their hesitation.
Right, agreed. And I think I get also the threat of it. I mean, we're gonna make a stupid move that probably puts you in a better situation than you were before if you call our bluff. If you go after one of our players, I don't know that that's necessarily a deterrent.
Again, because if Montreal decides to take the draft compensation instead, yes, they're losing a young center who, has shown some flashes, but we're also talking about a guy who's 3 years into his NHL career and he has not lived up to being the third overall pick. And if you're Carolina, all of a sudden you might be saddled with him at a 6.1 number this year. Like, and then you're just going to have to deal with negotiating with him next year, and you've inflated what his price is going to be. As I said, I doubt he's going to be making $6 million AAV moving forward past this 1 year deal. But, other people around the league were saying his number was like 2. Like, yep. So you're increasing it threefold. So this, even if he's going to take a discount next year, you're still looking at what, 4.5, right?
Yep,
at probably the lowest. So then you'd be stuck having to pay him all that unless you're going to let him walk at like 24 years old. Like, I get what he was doing, but it's very foolish to me from a hockey ops standpoint, and I just think it just makes him look really petty. And if I'm a player or a coaching staff member or a scout, I'm kind of looking at this Carolina situation. I'm saying, well, you're not willing to pay all these guys who have done a lot of good for you, but you're willing to go out there and throw around these offer sheets just to get back at somebody because you have a personal beef with them. I don't know if that's the most desirable employer if I have multiple options on the table.
Agreed. But I will thank the Hurricanes for providing some drama, some excitement into these dog days of the offseason in August. It's great to have some big NHL news to think about.
Yeah, we definitely don't get much of that these days.
Yep. So what we do have this episode, and I'm very excited about it, is we have our first podcast mailbag. We asked you for questions on our social media channels and everything, and you had some great questions for us. I'm excited to answer them with you, Dylan, and let's just dive right into the mailbag, all right?
All right.
So We have Gregory on Twitter asking, how many wins will the Kraken have next season? So we discussed earlier just how good we think the Kraken will be next season, and this question kind of gets to that, but we're being asked to give an actual total of wins. So Dylan, 82 game season, how many wins will the Kraken get?
All right, so the one thing we know about this team is that they're going to be hard to play against, right? Right.
Sure.
Ron Francis has made that very clear. So knowing that, I've looked at some similar teams from last year, such as St. Louis or Montreal, teams that are big, they're tough to play against, but they maybe lack some skill when it comes to scoring overall. Certainly depth of scoring throughout their lineups, or at least what they showed at points last year. So those are teams that'll have more wins than losses most years, but not by a large number. Usually where they kind of sneak into the playoffs or they'll make a name for themselves is in the overtime losses, right? Which of course give you a point and it helps pad your overall point standing. So looking at teams like that and thinking about the Kraken, Kraken are a team that's built for playoff hockey, not necessarily regular season hockey. I kind of came up with a 45 win number. So that would be, slightly more than half the games. But I think then this team could also have like 10 to 15 overtime losses, which we've seen from teams before. We saw teams get to double digits last year in a 56 game season, get to 10 overtime losses. So that would still put them around or a little above 100 points on the season, which should definitely make the playoffs in this division. But I just think the actual win number is just going to be like slightly above, 500, so to speak.
Right. Now, 45, that's funny because I ran the numbers myself. I was thinking a similar thing about a lot of overtime losses being tough to play against. And of course, the number I come up with was 44. And I was hoping I was going to be a little bit more bullish on the win number than you were. And of course, you hit me with 45. And I want to go 46 now. But yeah, I was thinking probably around, 98, 99 points. I don't know that they hit 100. But 44 wins, that gets you 88 points off the wins. Again, you might even have 10 or so overtime losses. 98, that gets you around that 100-point mark. So 44 is the number I'm going to go with. Of course, it's so hard to say exactly. It's a long season. Many things can happen. People were very off the mark with Vegas year one if we had guessed their win total. So we'll have to see where it goes.
Yeah.
So next question from the mailbag at Tarzan32513 on Twitter asks, who will lead the Kraken in each category? Goals, assists, points, etc. So Dylan, let's start with goals. Who's going to be the Kraken's leading goal scorer this season?
I'm going to be boring and I'm going to take the safe pick and I'm going to say Jordan Eberle.
Oh, good.
I think I just think he's the best natural goal scorer on the team, and I think being out of the Islanders' power play system that never suited him, something I've talked about before. I think he'll see his power play goals numbers tick up, pretty significantly in Seattle. So I think that'll help pad that number and make him their goal leader.
Now I'm glad you went with Eberle. He's probably would be the betting favorite to lead the Kraken in goals. I get it, and I think there's a good chance he will, but I'm going to go with Jaden Schwartz. I think he's going to absolutely thrive in a bigger role in Seattle. I think he's a perfect fit for the team, and the kind of speed and scoring ability he brings that he's shown flashes of, with the Blues, and he had a rough season last season, but he's been going through a lot of things in his life. I think he's ready to bounce back, and I could see him leading the team in goals. He was kind of this secondary goal scorer for the Blues when they had a lot of offensive weapons up front. So he, kind of fell to the wayside as far as attention on him. But I could see him leading the team in goals. He's scored 20 goals or more 4 different times in his career. But I think he could potentially hit 30 this year. He's going to have a lot of opportunity to do it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with that pick. I think he's definitely up there. I think really those are the two guys that we can look at and say those they're really probably the only two we could see leading the
Right.
team in goals.
Anyone else, I think, would be a pretty big underdog.
Yeah, they would be the Vegas Carlson, out of
Exactly. The
nowhere.
equivalent of William Karlsson just
Yeah.
going scoring, 40 goals after scoring like 5 the year before.
Yeah.
So moving on, assists. Who is going to lead the Kraken in assists, Dylan? Who's the playmaker?
I'm going to go a little off the board, and I'm going to say Vince Dunn.
Ooh, okay.
I've been on the record in the past talking about how I think when it comes to certainly like power play stuff, I think Vince Dunn's going to be out there a ton. He's really the only offensively minded defenseman on this team, so I feel like they're going to really lean on him in certain situations. I think he's going to get more playing time than he saw in St. Louis with this team, and I just think he's going to have a kind of a monster coming out party for the Kraken, and so I just think, part of that is also the depth of the forwards. I just think a lot of people will be competing with each other, and so whenever Vince Dunn's out there, he's going to have good options to move the puck to, and I just think he likes to throw pucks on net. Those create rebounds. Those create assists. So I'm going to go Vince Dunn.
Man, I really like that pick. Going with the interesting one for assists. And I could see the assist numbers being kind of spread out among a lot of players. That's kind of the nature of this team, where their offense is going to come from. And for my assist pick, one, I could see Jaden Schwartz also leading the team in assists too. But I'm going to go with Yanni Gourde. Now, I know he's more of a shutdown center and has certainly been that recently, but he does have offensive ability. He had 39 assists in 2017-18 when the Lightning hadn't played him in so much of a shutdown role yet at that point. And I think he can show that again, and I think he's going to be put in a position to use that ability as well. The Kraken are going to need him to provide scoring as well as the shutdown role. I think he can kind of convert to that more for the playoffs. But I do think he's going to provide a good amount of scoring for them in the regular season. And he's got playmaking ability. He goes hard to the net. He can kind of create, little passes off those rebounds, things like that. I think he'll be around a lot of offense this year, probably more than people think. So I'm going to go with Yanni Gourde.
It's interesting you bring that up because, well, one, he's going to miss part of the regular season with his shoulder injury, so it'll be quite the feat if he does lead the team in assists. And because on our roster we have him between Brandon Tanev and Mason Appleton, so you're really saying those guys are going to have some good goal scoring numbers this year.
See, I could see him in a different role for a lot of the regular season. The injury is probably the biggest impediment to him doing that. If he comes back sooner rather than later, that's my off the board interesting pick for assists.
Yeah. I mean, he's certainly the most probably experienced of all these skill guys. I would say probably for sure. So it's a good pick.
So points. We talked about goals. We talked about assists. This is where that comes together. Who's going to be the Kraken points leader at the end of the season?
For me, it's Jaden Schwartz. So, you kind of talked about how you could see him both for goals and assists. I think he's probably going to be top 3 in both categories, which on this team I think will make him the point leader. I don't think my Vince Dunn pick for assists, he's going to have a ton of goals this year, and I don't know that Jordan Eberle is going to have a ton of assists, but I think Jaden Schwartz is going to be heavily involved in just about everything offensive that this team does. So I could see him having a good, 65-plus point season.
Yep, Schwartz is my pick as well. I'm optimistic about what he's going to do this season. Eberle is a contender here. He could get enough assists depending on how he's used on the power play. I think he could be in the mix, but I think Jaden Schwartz is, probably provides the best of the goal scoring and the playmaking. So I want to add one category that wasn't asked in the question, but I think it's a fun one to look at, and that is penalty minutes. Who is going to be the Kraken's penalty minute leader this season?
There are so many good options. There's lots of big bruising defensemen. You could see an Alexiak. You could see maybe a Carson Soucy, depending on how they decide to use him, what they want out of him. There's forwards-wise, you've got a guy like Brandon Tanev, who's no stranger to the penalty box. Although he's actually a pretty smart player. He knows how to avoid that stuff.
I was looking at his penalty minute numbers, and they are surprisingly low.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna probably go Alexiak just because I think he's gonna try to be a physical presence out there, and I think he's he might lead the team in ice time. So I'm just gonna say based on the amount of opportunity he'll have to take penalties, we'll just make him the penalty leader for the team.
I like that pick. It's, volume based, and I think you might get that. There's no players on the team that really stand out as far as a lot of penalty minutes. The Kraken traded away Curtis McDermott to the Avs for a fourth round pick. I think he probably would have been the favorite had he stayed on the roster with all the fights and whatnot. But without him, yeah, we really don't know. But my pick is Jeremy Lauzon. He has that edge to him, and I love that he plays as physically as he does. He's not afraid to push guys around. I could see him getting a lot of penalties, that way with just physical play in front of the net that's called. He's a younger player, so I could see him, maybe getting beat a couple times, having to take a tripping or a hooking penalty as well. And I could see him fighting. I could see him being the guy that steps up to protect his teammates when the Kraken need that. He had 40 penalty minutes in 41 games last year, so he's around, about a penalty minute per game. I could see him keep up that pace or even increase it, and that's one of the highest paces on the team already. So I'm going to go with the young guy, Jeremy Lauzon, to lead in penalty minutes.
Yeah, I like that pick. He certainly has the most edge, I'd say, of all these guys. My only question with him was how much playing time he's going to get. We still don't know how that all shake out, but yeah, good pick.
All right, next question. This one is from Nick or Twisted Wrister on Twitter. He's also got a YouTube channel. It's good stuff. Who are you eyeing as the Kraken's first captain, or will they even name a captain? Now, I don't really know if the Kraken will name a captain. None of us know at this point. They haven't really talked about it. And this is going to be one of the most interesting stories to follow in training camp. Of course, the Vegas Golden Knights did not name a captain their first year. It worked out pretty well. Dylan, what are you thinking as far as a captain?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards they're not going to announce a captain. I think the fact that training camp starts literally days before the preseason starts, all that stuff. I just don't think there's going to be a ton of time for any one player to really kind of ascend to the top of the locker room, so to speak. I just think whenever you're throwing together an expansion team like this, you want to give it a year, let all the dynamics work themselves out. You're really trying to focus just on building chemistry everywhere, right? Figuring out who's matching well with who. I just think determining a captain is not necessarily a high priority. That and for a lot of these guys, there's a lot of guys on this team that have worn letters before. Right, they haven't necessarily been captains, but you have a decent amount of guys who've been assistants at one point or the other, or have at least been on leadership roles on their teams. So I just think it's one of those things you don't want to rock the cart too much by singling one person out as a captain while everyone is trying to figure out so much all at once. That being said, if someone was to be named captain, I think it would be Mark Giordano. Just because I think he has the most experience with it. I think he's the most veteran player on the team, and I think also the fact that he's only under contract for one more year, so it'd be one of those things like he'd kind of be a bridge captain if you felt like you really needed one this year, but you didn't know who maybe the right long-term pick would be. He'd kind of be a bridge captain that you could have until you get to next offseason, which would hopefully be more of a normal offseason.
Agreed, and I think the Kraken shouldn't be in any rush to name a captain. You kind of have to see how these things develop. Usually when a team, if they know they are going to pick a captain, usually the previous captain has left or whatever it is, they kind of see how training camp plays out, how the preseason goes, who steps up and, who assumes that role and who the players respect. And I think you'll have training camp, you'll have the preseason to see that, but it'll be so rushed. As you said, there's so much else going on as far as learning systems, just making sure everyone gets to know each other. It feels almost forced to kind of name a captain while that dynamic is still a work in progress. It just doesn't make sense to do it right away, unless, of course, I could see maybe Giordano almost naturally assuming that role. And if the coaching staff feels that, well, he's already kind of doing this, it might be worth it to give him the C, just as he's already doing it. It makes sense. But yeah, I would say Giordano would probably be the favorite to be captain if there is one right away. If it's not him, I'd have to say maybe Jaden Schwartz. We mentioned him a lot already on the podcast, but he'd probably be my other pick if they want a guy. He has more term. If they want a guy who's not going to be just a 1-year stopgap, he's great in the community. He's a 10-year NHL veteran. I think he might be a good pick as well.
Yeah, I could certainly see if they were to name like a Giordano captain that Jaden Schwartz would certainly be an alternate. And then Yanni Gourde, I guess, would be the third guy to throw in there just because of his experience. He's one of those lead by example kind of guys. And, teams do like to reward that. So,
yep. So, next question. Greg on Twitter asks, if Matty Beniers joins the Kraken in April after his college season ends, will that count as one of the 3 years off of his entry-level rookie contract? So the short answer is yes, it will. But Dylan, why don't you explain why that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, we can kind of split the duties here. So normally, when it comes to burning a year of the entry-level contract, a player has to play 10 games, either regular season playoff or some combination of the two. They have to play 10 games in the NHL, and that burns a year off their entry-level contract. As far as that contract being done, they have to play 40 games if you want to accrue a year towards free agency. That would be like an impossible scenario in this specific example. But when it comes to Beniers, RJ, as we saw with a lot of the players taken, certainly at the top of this draft, they were overagers, so to speak. So why don't you explain why that factors in for Beniers more so than the 10 games played thing?
Right. So the 10 games played is used for what's called an entry-level slide, where basically if a player comes in and plays less than 10 games, so up to 9 games, that contract is eligible to slide 1 year ahead. So it doesn't count as a year off the entry-level contract. It just moves on to the next year. But that doesn't apply to Beniers because there is an exception to the entry-level slide rule that if the player is 19 on September 15th of their first year of the contract, so let's say Beniers signs in April after his college season, he would be 19 at the time, and if that player turns 20 during that same year, by the end of that calendar year, then they're not eligible for the slide no matter how many games they play. So Beniers being born November 5th, would, of course, turn 20 by the end of the calendar year. So he is not eligible at all for an entry-level contract slide. So if he does sign with the Kraken at the end of the college season for the remainder of the NHL season, it would count as the first year off of his entry-level contract. So the Kraken will no doubt have that in their minds, be considering that if they choose to do that one way or the other.
Yeah, and it'll be, an interesting decision for them to make. Obviously, we'll, of course, see how well he does at Michigan this year. I think there's a good chance where he's going to prove that he's probably ready for that, and he can join them in their, hunt for the playoffs and then potentially on a playoff run. It's going to be fun to watch. It'll also depend on where they feel like the team is at, if there's an opening because of injury, all that kind of stuff. But I think there's a good chance he's going to be around for the playoff run, at least maybe activated on the roster. Of course, in the playoffs, you got a little more freedom for that kind of thing. So, it's interesting. Really good question, though.
Absolutely. I like that question, and it's something we're definitely going to be looking at later in the season. It's something that's going to be a big issue, big talking point for us at that time. So next question, and this is a fun one, from Jared on Twitter. What are we going to call the Kraken-Canucks rivalry? He suggested Pig War, Pound on the Sound. He wanted to see what ideas we had, and I will say, man, it was tough coming up with ideas. There's nothing natural that really seems like it would fit. But I do want to talk about Pig War. Now, I was like, what is that? When I saw that Pig War, but I looked it up, and the Pig War is actually a pretty interesting story. There was a conflict between the United States and the United Kingdom in 1859 called the Pig War, believe it or not. And it was this conflict that happened, around Vancouver Island. It was over, it was a territory dispute over the San Juan Islands, in between by Vancouver Island, and the British and the Americans. There was this ambiguity in the border agreement in the Oregon boundary dispute, where they left it. It was supposed to be separated at the middle of the channel, but there were kind of two places you could separate it, and they had both sent settlers in, and it culminated in an American shooting the pig of a British settler who was eating his potatoes. Now, the article does state this was not the first incident. This was not the first time that the pig had gotten into the potatoes. So, there was a dispute. Troops got called in on both sides, and it looked like this was going to escalate before the two governments did the diplomacy and de-escalated the situation, came up with a compromise to split kind of in the middle of the two areas, and everything was diffused. But Pig War, it's an interesting, historical happening. I don't know. As a history nerd, I love Pig War, but I don't know that it really has the mass appeal for something like this. But thank you. Thank you so much, Jared, for bringing that up, because now I get to learn about that. I loved reading about that story.
It is a really good story, and I do think it has some charm. It has some good local history to it. My only thing is it wasn't the U.S. versus Canada. You know what I mean? And I feel like if it's gonna be for today's rivalry, it needs to be something more with Canada than with the pre-Canadian UK government, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I mean.
Go ahead.
It's that's what was there at the time. It's what you got. But yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just looking at this page.
It's all good.
Yeah, read the Wikipedia article for Pig War. Like, anyone who's interested, read it. I guarantee you won't regret it. I mean, there's this section of it that just says pig that goes into the pig incident. I mean, give it a read. Give it a read. It'll be worth it.
Yeah, and as far as rivalry nicknames go, it's not something we see too often in the NHL. Usually, it's reserved for rivalries in a city. Obviously, you and I grew up in Southern California, so there's the freeway series between the Ducks and the Kings. But like you and I were trying to figure, is there a named rivalry between the Kings and the Sharks, or the Sharks and Vegas? And there just kind of isn't one. It's one of those hard things to come up with. That being said, there's a lot of stuff to work with when it comes to the Kraken versus the Canucks, right? Obviously, the Canucks have the orca as their mascot. Kraken, they're both things that live in the ocean. There's something there with the underwater potentially. The fact that it is across a border, so you can always work in border stuff. The Pacific Northwest, they got the same climate, same kind of region stuff. There's trees everywhere, there's greenery everywhere. That's something that's unique to the area. The mountain ranges, there's a lot of places to look, but yeah, nothing was kind of naturally coming to me, unfortunately.
Right, there's a lot of tools to work with there. There's got to be something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we thought about it. We just couldn't put it all together, but maybe one of you can. Let us know. Think about it. I mean, we'd love to have a cool name for that rivalry. It's going to be a great rivalry. It'd be cool to have a good, catchy name for it. Until then, I'm going to think of it as Pig War.
It's a good working title.
Yep, good working title, exactly. But yeah, let us know if you come up with anything. So next question, Scott on Twitter asks, what are the odds of NHL players playing in the 2022 Olympics? And if they do participate, which Kraken players are likely to go? So this is a great question. And actually, I do have an article written on this, ready to go. And you'll be able to find that on the website, emeraldcityhockey.com, when the NHL announcement comes out. But, of course, we can talk about it here. The question was asked. As for the odds of NHL players playing in the Olympics, I've got to think it's very likely, and we should see an announcement soon, right, Dylan?
I mean, yes, gun to my head, if I'm picking one of them, I'm saying they're going, but I don't know that I'd describe it as very likely. I think this is one of those things where we've seen time and time again the NHL and specifically the ownership of the NHL teams are very, very reluctant to send players to the Olympics. They will take any excuse they can to get out of it. So I think the longer COVID is staying around and relevant, I think the fact that there's, already some dispute and the idea has been floated around of the USA boycotting the Winter Olympics because they're in Beijing, or at least China, and you know, if the USA doesn't go, how does the NHL react to that? I don't know that the USA is not going to go. I think that might be a stretch, but I just think between COVID, between that, the insurance thing being all figured out, because that's always the biggest deal with them sending players to the Olympics. I just think there's enough for the owners and the NHL to glob on to say, look, we just couldn't reasonably or in good faith send our players to the Olympics this year. You know what I mean? And that's, I feel like, all they're looking for.
Say, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you make a good point. I figured after the insurance was figured out that was kind of the last major hurdle, and at that point it was kind of a done deal. But we haven't heard anything, from the league, the IOC, anything like that. So I think you make a good point about there still being lots of reasons, excuses, whatever you want to call it, for the NHL not being able to go. Yeah, we haven't reached the point of even, national boycotts. That's something that could actually be a factor this year. So that's true. We'll have to wait and see. But let's assume that they are, and see which Kraken players are most likely to go if the NHL does go to the Olympics. And that's fun to think about because we have, a full roster of players now, and some of them could be Olympians. Mm-hmm. Now, personally, I think the Kraken have 3 players that are likely to go to the Olympics, with another 4 that are kind of on the outside looking in, but they do have a chance to make the national team roster. So the biggest lock for me is Philip Grubauer, Kraken starting goalie. He's definitely the best German-born goalie in the world right now. Probably best of all time, I would say. This is an easy pick. He's represented Germany many times before in international play, and they're going to rely on him quite a bit, especially being in that Group A with USA and Canada.
Yeah, no, he's a lock for sure. No question.
So the next one that now I think is a lock is Alexander True. So he just helped Denmark qualify for their first Olympic hockey tournament ever by beating the host Norway in the Olympic qualifiers yesterday. So he had kind of a minor role on that team. They beat South Korea 11-1 in their second game, and True finished the game with 0 points, which is seems actually kind of difficult to do. So he had more of a minor role on the team. He's a younger player, I understand it, but there's only 6 Danish players in the NHL, and is one of those right now, and is one of those 6, I've got to think he's a lock for the team, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and yes, he may not have been like the driving force of their team as they qualified for the Olympics, but as you said, he was there, right? I mean, that kind of tells you he'd most likely get a nod.
Yeah, absolutely. So the third player that I think is likely to go to the Olympics is Jonas Donskoi. So he represented Finland at the World Cup. So he's played for them before, and I think he would play a similar role on Team Finland to the one that he's expected to play for the Kraken, which is cool. That top 9 forward, you can slot in anywhere and basically just add him where you need some offense, some creativity, some skill. And I think he could work really well with some of the talented Finnish players that they have as far as forwards. I'd like to see what he could do with like a Patrick Laine. But I think he's probably a favorite to make that team, even though he would be in the bottom 6 likely.
Yeah, and as you said, his calling card is just offensive creativity, finding little nooks and crannies to set himself, and then all of a sudden he's open and he's scoring on you. And I feel like in an Olympic tournament, that's really at a premium. Somebody who's creative like that, because much like with the Kraken, these Olympic teams generally they're thrown together last minute. You got like a week to get to know everybody and practice together, and then you're right into playing games. So I feel like somebody like him, who, as we've seen throughout his NHL career, can just, he builds chemistry very fast and easily with just about everybody. So I think someone with his skill set is exactly who you want on an Olympic roster.
Agreed. Now, there are some Kraken players who are probably currently on the outside looking in from their national team picture, but I do think they have an opportunity to play their way onto the national teams, depending on how they do with the Kraken this year. And that could be something exciting to look at and to kind of root for them. Now, part of that is, like, they're probably going to be playing increased roles on the Kraken, so it's kind of an audition of sorts for their national team to show that they belong. So we'll start with a trio of Swedes. We have Adam Larsson, Alex Wenberg, and Kalle Yarncroak. So I'll start with Adam Larsson. So he's going to have a lot of competition to make that Swedish national team. I mean, this is a country known for their excellent blue liners. He's probably going to have to compete with, Erik Karlsson, Hampus Lindholm, those kind of guys to show that he should be on the team. But it seems like he'll be given every opportunity to do that with the Kraken. I mean, they obviously signed him to that big deal with the belief that he's going to be a top 4 defenseman. So if he's kind of able to impress, getting around 20 minutes a night with Seattle, maybe Swedish team gives him a look.
Yeah, I think he's definitely going to be someone that they, if they have any sort of camp where they, they're trying to, nail down those last couple roster spots, I would think he'd get an invite to that. But yeah, I agree with you. It's most likely just going to depend on how he looks with the Kraken. If he looks just kind of like a middle tier NHL defenseman, he's probably not going to make it. But if the change of scenery, works well for him, which I think it will, being out of Edmonton now, again, this is a guy less than a decade ago, or about a decade ago, he was in line to, be a first overall pick in the NHL. He's got skill, he's got talent, and I just feel like because he didn't immediately live up to that, we've kind of always viewed him as kind of a lesser defenseman, or at least an average one, when, he has been an above average player. So, yeah, I think it'll all come down to how he plays, and I think what kind of role he's playing with the Kraken, and whether or not Sweden thinks that they need that.
Yep. So another player, another Swede, who, again, will have a bigger role with the Kraken than what he's had previously, and will have a chance to kind of show that he might belong on the national team roster, and that is Alex Wenberg. And a lot of people, were questioned it when Ron Francis said that he was going to play in the top 6, that he saw him as a top 6 center for the Kraken. But I think he means it, and certainly with Yanni Gourde being out to start the year, he's going to get top 6 minutes as a center, and if he does well enough, I mean, how could you not at least look at that if you're in charge of Team Sweden?
Yeah, I mean, we saw him kind of increase his offensive output last year. He's an excellent two-way guy. He's very responsible defensively. I think he would be the perfect kind of third or fourth line center on an Olympic team, where it's, you're not counting on him to necessarily go out there and score, but play, not a total shutdown role, but a responsible role, while still being able to create offense on that Olympic surface. So yeah, I think he might have the best chances of making a Team Sweden of the 3 guys we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and the third is, the third is Kalle Yarncroak. Now, I don't think it depends as much on what Yarncroak does this season as much as the other two, because he's kind of shown what he is as a player. You can put him anywhere. He's kind of the Swedish Army knife, I guess. And it'll come down to whether Team Sweden thinks that they want or need a player like that is very versatile, that they can put anywhere in the lineup. And if Yarncroak does look good for the Kraken, and he probably will get some increased ice time, increased opportunities to score, maybe the scoring numbers jump off the page a little bit compared to what he's done in the past. he could be an option for them if they want a player like that.
Yeah, he's interesting because, as much as I was saying with Jonas Donskoi, you want a creative player, one of these guys that can, think on his feet. He has good instincts, and all that plays even better in international tournaments than it does in the NHL, I feel like. I feel like with Calle Yarncroak, his creativity and, as you said, his versatility is almost more suited to a North American style game than it is to an international game, because he knows how to use his body. He doesn't necessarily hit guys, but he knows how to use his body. He knows how to protect the puck. He knows how to get in passing lanes, and he knows how to get in scoring lanes and screen the goalie and all that stuff. That doesn't always factor in as much in international play, and so for me personally, I'd put his chances the lowest of the three guys just for that reason. But like you said, if he starts scoring, if he ascends to a really solid top six role for the Kraken, I could see a Team Sweden bringing him on board just because he might be like an injury replacement kind of guy where he's not necessarily in the starting lineup, but if you need him at any time, you can just plug and play, so to speak. So I think his is the most fascinating to watch, him and Larsson's.
So the final player that I think could be a contender. Now, I will admit this is a long shot, but for Team Canada, Yanni Gourde. So we know what Yanni Gourde can do. We know he is a great shutdown center. Obviously, Canada is going to have an embarrassment of riches at every position. They could go any number of ways with their roster. I mean, you could have Matt Barzal or John Tavares as your fourth line center if that's what you want to do. But I think it's going to come down to Canada GM Doug Armstrong's decision of, again, what kind of player do you want in that role? Do you want a more pure shutdown center who you can put out against the other team's top line and they're going to be able to shut them down? And if so, I think Gourde's body of work makes him a contender here. He's going to have to compete with the likes of Sean Couturier or Philip Danault, if they're looking for that role. But, I don't see why he shouldn't be mentioned among those names.
Right, and I might give him the nod over those guys because, again, you're talking an international ice surface. It's wider, it plays a little faster, it plays a little less physical, and I feel like his style of shutdown game relies a lot less on his physicality than a Couturier or even a Danault at times. Certainly as far as bodying up guys and that sort of thing, I feel like he does it more from a skill and smart standpoint, which I feel like would play more universally on a Team Canada because you could match him with some scoring wingers and it wouldn't exactly be like this, ho-hum offensive line. You know what I mean? Like he can hang with anybody. So I think he does have an outside shot at making that team.
So those are the Kraken players that might be able to qualify for the Olympics, and we might see in Beijing, and that would be really cool if they could. Personally, I'm hoping that we see NHL players in the Olympics, and it'd be very, very cool to see some Kraken players there.
Yeah.
So, last question from the mailbag, and this is one that, kind of like the rivalry run, we had a tough time with. It's from Joe on Instagram. He asked, can you guys come up with any catchy line names? And he mentions that he couldn't think of any good ones. So he put that onto us. And, man, I'm sorry, Joe. There was nothing obvious that came out looking great. We had maybe a Wenberg, Yarncroak, Johansson line, like a Trey Kroner line with some Swedes. The Triple J line of Schwartz, McCann, and Eberle. You've got Jaden, Jared, and Jordan. I don't know. Tanev, Appleton, and Gourde. That's one that we had that we have on our projected lineup. I think might be a fan favorite line. I call it the tag line, first letter of each of their last names. Like game of tag, you're it. They're gonna be skating. You're gonna be chasing, all over the ice. I don't know. Dylan, you got anything?
No, I mean, as you said, we really tried to work on this. If Morgan Geeky's centering a line, the obvious choice is, the Geek Squad, right? Something like that. But it is tough. I feel like with with some of these line combinations, it takes a little bit of time. Obviously, of course, we're working off of our projected lineup, but we don't know what the actual one will be. But it's one of those things. It takes time. You got to see what kind of things they're doing. I think if Tanev, Gord, and Appleton do play together, as you said, that's a fan favorite line waiting to happen, and there will be something there. But it might be that we're waiting for like a quote from one of them, right? After one of their big nights, Brandon Tanev might say something that then sparks what that line is going to be named after, right? A lot of times these are really formed in the locker room. The guys will refer to themselves a certain way, and then that gets, brought out to the fans as a whole. So it's one of those things. I'm looking forward to having line nicknames, but yes, it's a struggle right now, especially because we don't even know what the lines are yet.
Yeah, it's tough to figure it out right now, and like you said, a lot of times it's the personality of the line that comes out, and that provides you with the name for it. And I am sure we will see some great line names. But if any of you do have any ideas for cool line names, potential lines that could happen, let us know. There's got to be something to work with there. We'd love to hear your ideas. We will, if we see a good one, we will talk about it. We'll bring it up. We'd like to see that.
Yeah.
So that's it for the mailbag and for this episode of the Emerald City Hockey Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and an extra thank you to everyone who submitted questions for the mailbag. We had a lot of great questions. We were happy to see it. A lot of great topics to discuss, and I'm sure we will do another one of these at some point. So have your questions ready for us, and we'll see you next week.